Very shortly after Nuts and Milk, Hudson Soft released their second Famicom game, Lode Runner. There's a nice original musical theme here. We've seen more than one Famicom game with virtually no music, so this is sort of a sign that Hudson's taking the Famicom pretty seriously. Remember that wall-to-wall music during video games wasn't really a given at the time. Now, this is a game you yourself may have played, since unlike Nuts and Milk, it was released in the US eventually. Though not by Hudson themselves, Lode Runner actually has a pretty long and twisty release history. Back in 1984, it was still a hot new computer game created by one guy, Doug Smith, and first released on the Apple II in 1983, published by Broderbund. It was a huge hit, and was ported to every system known to mankind. Now, in terms of Japan, it reached arcades in 1984, courtesy of Irem. Note that the featureless stick figures have been replaced with cavemen and a guy in like a futuristic-looking outfit. Irem would release several Lode Runner arcade games. Now, surprisingly, Hudson themselves were not responsible for the Japanese computer releases. Nope, System Soft, another Japanese software company, put out a number of versions, and Sony released this MSX version, which looks just like the original Apple computer game. So Hudson redesigned the entire look of the game themselves, though it uses some levels from the original. The simple stick figures were filled out. The protagonist looks pretty similar to the guy in Irem's game. He's wearing a space helmet that looks just like the other guys. But the bad guys, well, if they look familiar, that's because Hudson reused that exact same sprite for Bomberman. In fact, in the ending of the Japanese version of Bomberman, they tried to link the two games together by claiming Bomberman became the character in Lode Runner. So for those not familiar with Lode Runner, here's how it works. You run around collecting piles of gold, evading your pursuers. Your one weapon is the ability to dig a hole, which will temporarily trap one bad guy, or allow you to drop down through it to the level below. Once you've collected all the piles of gold, a ladder appears and you can escape the level. The levels then get harder, and then even harder. Upon release, the Hudson Lode Runner became a huge hit in Japan, selling over 1 million copies, and still remains, I believe, one of Hudson's best-selling games ever. Once the NES came out in the US, Broderbund themselves released Hudson's versions, though not until 1987. So here we have the beginning of a common occurrence, the US getting NES games sometimes a few years after the Japanese release. Another common occurrence, the Broderbund cover art depicts the game completely differently than Hudson's art. It's painted in what I call the young adult novel cover style of illustration, and makes Lode Runner himself look like an Indiana Jones kind of guy, whereas Hudson's box art is much more cartoony looking and features a super deformed protagonist. But probably the most notable of all the changes Hudson made was that the levels now take up multiple screens, thus the screen scrolls as you move. Now, Hogan's Alley used some basic horizontal scrolling, but Lode Runner is really the first game for the Famicom, in which you control the scrolling by moving your on-screen avatar. As you get about 1/4 of the screen length from the edge, your character suddenly stays still and the background begins moving. Side-scrolling is the foundation upon which many Famicom games are based, and Lode Runner was the first Famicom game to actually utilize it.